The Brooklyn Vegan Show is a podcast about music brought to you by the music blog and online record store Brooklyn Vegan. Make sure to subscribe to hear all of our upcoming episodes featuring interviews with musicians and more, and find us 24/7 at brooklynvegan.com, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Hey, welcome to the new episode of the Brooklyn Vegan Show. I'm BV editor Andrew Sacker, and for today's episode, I'll be joined by Pelican to look at 10, technically 11 albums that influenced their new album, Flickering Resonance, which comes out May 16th on Run for Cover. It's the instrumental Chicago band's first album in 6 years, and though Pelican have always sort of been grouped with the metal scene, there's a lot more to them, and they made it a point to explore that on this record, which is something we'll really dive into on this episode. Without giving away which records we talk about, I think if you are into any type of underground 90s-centric rock, metal, hardcore, post-hardcore, punk, emo, you'll find a lot to like about this record. The albums that Pelican picked are all albums that I'm really into, so it was really fun to get to talk to them about this stuff, and really, really fun to hear what they had to say. Before we get to the episode, just a shout out to our sponsor, DistroKid. Musicians, head to distrokid.com/BrooklynVegan/VIP to get 30% off your first year's membership at DistroKid, the premier service for uploading your music to all major streaming platforms and more. That link is also provided in the description of this episode, where you can learn more about DistroKid. And now, here's my interview with Pelican. Hey, welcome to the Brooklyn Vegan Show.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Nice to
Thanks
be
for
here.
having us.
Yeah, of course. Just real quick, can you both say your name just so people can kind of place a name to a voice as they listen?
My name is Laurent. I am in Pelican.
My name is Trevor, and I'm also in Pelican.
So we're here to celebrate the new Pelican album, Flickering Resonance. And one fun thing we're going to do is break down 10, technically 11 albums that influenced it. But first, a couple other questions I have. So, Laurent, you left the band for about 10 years. Tell me a little bit about your time away from Pelican and your return to the band.
10 years was a long time. Too long. I left the band. I started sort of feeling drifty right around the tail end of an exceptional amount of touring that we were doing around What We All Come to Need. Um, I was increasingly sort of feeling, just a need to be with family, start a family, and being on the road all the time made that difficult to engender. In segueing back to work, which we all did to varying degrees when we were off the road, I found some stability in the bar restaurant world. I then had my first of two sons. All those things kind of compounded to me wanting to take a break from the band. We kept working on things and recording. We did another EP at the time, and then I just sort of felt like I wouldn't be able to give it the passion and the time that it needed. So I left Dallas, um, took my place, and I returned a couple years ago around a string of live activities in Europe. Um, and I'd been missing not only this band, but just being in a band in general, and was feeling the need to create again. And so, that opportunity presenting itself happened at a very good time for me, and I've enjoyed it tremendously ever since.
So tell me a little bit about how, this is your first album in 6 years, which I guess the last one was also your first album in 6 years. But tell me a little bit about the seeds being sown for a new full length record, especially with it being your first album with the band and even longer.
I think when Laurent rejoined the band, like he said, it was sort of around a string of shows that we had set up in Europe. And I mean, the roots of those were in 2020, but the shows kept getting pushed back year after year as the COVID pandemic kind of extended. Um, but we didn't really know what we were going to do long term at that point. Basically, the 2 years that we spent during the pandemic were spent more on prepping reissues of our first three albums with Thrill Jockey than working on new material because we just didn't have the opportunity to get into a room together. So when Laurent rejoined the group after Dallas split, it was really like our whole mentality for the 2 prior years had been like focusing on the past and kind of getting in this retrospective mode, which hasn't really ever been a thing that Pelican has done much over the years. So it was kind of nice to have that moment to kind of like look back and celebrate our legacy. And in the midst of that tour, I had a conversation with Ken from Numero Group, and they were doing a series of singles where they're having new bands cover songs from their back catalog. Um, and that sort of tapped into the same mode that we were in, right? Because we were kind of celebrating our past. It was like it gave us an opportunity to kind of delve into our influences. We asked Laurent if he wanted to be a part of that. We ended up doing an unwound cover and a karate cover. And I think the process of getting together and working on material that wasn't like relearning our old songs, but like actually creating something new, even though they were covers. I think those were sort of the seeds of working on a new album. Up to that point, we weren't really sure what the future held for us, but after that, we were more adamant that we wanted to continue creating with Laurent. He rejoined the band as a contributing member, and we started writing pretty shortly after that, I think.
It was pretty quick. Yeah.
So something that stood out to me about the album announcement is it said that this album taps into the spirit of the heyday of Chicago's all ages venue Fireside Bowl and its mixed bills that would have like post hardcore, space rock, indie metal, emo bands all in the same show. And Laurent, you gave a quote that said, I was like, well, I guess the metal world is where we fit. But now we're willing to acknowledge all the suits we're wearing. So if we could go down memory lane for a bit, tell me a little bit about the Fireside Bowl scene in the 90s and how you both first found your way into that scene.
I moved to the United States in 1995. My family's from France. I lived in France for a good chunk of my life, and then lived in South Korea, where my dad was an expat and where I got into punk and hardcore, and metal, really metal first, and then punk and hardcore eventually. Living over there, and this is, late 80s, early 90s, so there's already like not the access. Um, to music that you have now. You find out about things from zines, record stores, videos. Even when I was watching like Headbangers Ball and stuff, it would be on like dubbed, uh, VHS copies that like kids at school had and stuff. So already like the search, and the gratification of finding out about bands was like pretty immense and gratifying. I moved here for university, and I'm quite sure that one of the reasons I chose Chicago was because I assumed it would have a massive hardcore scene because of, Victory Records and some other things that were just like, that's what's on the map. And I think the other cities I was considering were also very strong hardcore scene potentials, like DC and Boston, and others. But, I found Trevor and Larry pretty much right away, out of just how tightly knit the rather small hardcore scene was here at the time. And the Fireside was just like, that's, you went to Reckless Records to buy records, you got flyers. The flyer was like one flyer for the Fireside. So it wasn't like super difficult to be like, well, maybe I should go to shows at the Fireside. Um, and those bills were just like, I mean, for one, it was like a social place to go to be around other people. Um, and there weren't like as many of those. This is pre-chat rooms, like things like that. And yeah, when Fugazi would roll through town, you'd have like 1,000 people there, but outside of those bigger shows it was just much smaller, and the Fireside was just that hub. And part of the booking mechanism employed at the time was like, if you want to roll through and you want to show, you're going to end up on some pretty diverse bills. So I think the fans really benefited, and the exposure you got was pretty much like just awesome. I think it broke down a lot of barriers too. You could go see a band that would, be on the heavier side, and it would end up with, they'd end up getting paired with like a traveling emo band or something on Lookout or whatever. So for people who, were less genre specific and less tribal, it was just like just a great way to tap into different things. So that's my experience of it, kind of like as a foreigner moving here, and pretty much finding it right away to be like, oh, this is going to be cool. And just approaching people at the time was really easy. It was like, hey, cool shirt, or like, a band would roll through and you'd talk to the merch person and be like, what else do you have in there that I should be paying attention to? And you would just start to build, your little network really organically.
Yeah, I mean, just to rewind a little bit before Laurent got to the country, got into punk in 93, 94, and at that time in Chicago, there wasn't really a central hub. But prior to when I got into it, there was McGregor's, which was way out in the suburbs. But I think by the time I came in, they'd even stopped doing shows there, and it was really just like a hodgepodge of VFW halls and houses where people would do shows, but all of those were spread out all over the place, and most of them were in the suburbs. There was a brief period where they started doing shows at a spot called Wrigley Side in the Wrigleyville neighborhood, but that was pretty short lived. And Fireside, as I remember it, um, was a spot that they started. The first show I went to there was a benefit show for a project that Dave Dumpsterland was doing to try and open an all ages venue in Chicago that would act as a central hub for the punk scene. So I think he was in partnership with Eric, who was doing the punk rock voicemail, which was like the hub for finding out about shows back then. It was like a phone number that you would call, and he would just read off all the shows that were happening that week. And that was how you found out about shows at that time. So it was him and Eric, and think I don't remember who else was involved, but they were trying to raise money to do this. And Fireside was just like a place that they found that they could rent and set up a PA and do a show. And the first show I remember seeing there was Rustweiler, Ambition Mission, a couple of others, and it felt so weird to be at a bowling alley watching bands, but also we were so used to going to shows at disparate locations like VFW halls that it wasn't that out of the blue, not that out of the ordinary, but there were just bowling lanes, which felt kind of weird. But what happened was the owner seemed open to having people come by and do these shows to make money because it was a bowling alley in a pretty disused neighborhood. And I think he just relished having people in the door, in the bar, drinking beers, making any kind of money in other ways than just having people bowl. So I think they just ended up doing more and more shows there. And at the time that Laurent would have gotten here was when Dave Eves and Brian Peterson were booking shows there like every night of the week. And at a certain point, it flipped from them even, I don't think they were even doing bowling anymore. It was just a venue. But it was great. I mean, it was exactly the hub that they were working towards raising money to create in the first place. It just so happened to be the ownership was outside of the hands of the punk scene.
So, how would you say that being part of that scene shaped you both as artists and people, and then ultimately shaped Pelican as a band?
I mean, I want to answer the thing. You mentioned that quote. I think the reason that that came up is that some of our early bookings there, thanks to Brian, were really presenting a local band with an opportunity to end up on a heavy bill. That for us were like the penultimate shows, like opening for High on Fire and ISIS, when we were sort of finding our sound was hugely important. But I think over time, uh, we've always felt like we just come from a whole host of other influences, um, which really represent that particular ecosystem, which is like you go see one band and then the opener, you're like, I've never heard of this band. I guess they're from Oakland or whatever. And then you watch and you're like, okay, so I'm also really into this. And then one day it's like June of 44. The next it's His Hero Is Gone. And then you're like, maybe I should go see Modest Mouse Tuesday. I don't have anything else going on. And you're like, actually, I really like this. Whatever it is, um, it ends up having some sort of impact on you as an impressionable, young person discovering music anyways. But also it sets the seed for like, hey, traveling musicians in punk and hardcore bands, like we share this collective thing. And this is the space where we do our thing. And I think it's like the tie that binds all those scenes in some way. And I feel is an important part of how we've evolved as a band, despite, like sometimes getting lumped into the heavy side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense because even like my experience as a young person, and I think I would have heard of Pelican at some point in the early mid 2000s, and I was probably I don't know if I identify as being part of a particular scene, but my interests were probably leaning towards punk and emo the most. And then Pelican just entered my life through that. And like, I didn't even know really about like the sort of more sludge metal stuff until later on. But Pelican were there, like as one of the bands that were talked about in like the punk and emo circles that I was part of. So I feel like it's like when I found out later, like, oh, most people consider Pelican metal. I was like, oh, that's interesting. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of like where our records landed in terms of labels. Like Hydra had, their roots are in the hardcore scene, and obviously, I mean, they did like Piebald 7 inch, so they're tied into emo as well. But I think the conception everyone always had was that that was a metal label. And then when we shifted from Hydra Head, we shifted to Southern Lord, which they also have roots in hardcore and punk. But again, it's more the public conception is of them as a metal label. So I think it was easy for people to kind of categorize us in that way, even though like our early shows, it was all punk venues and playing with hardcore bands. And I mean, it was obviously the metal influence was there from the start. I mean, like Godflesh and Earth were in heavy, heavy rotation when we started the band. But I think like the scene that we were operating in and kind of the headspace that we were coming from at the beginning was one from hardcore and punk.
it is interesting, like, how much the perception of your band is sort of informed by the record label you're on. And
Yes.
on that note, tell me about putting this new album out on Run for Cover.
Run for Cover is a label I've been following for quite some time, and I know Tom through Cloakroom. So when we were discussing possible homes for the label, and especially all these conversations that we've kind of been having internally about when did people lose track of the fact that we have these punk hardcore roots, it seemed like, especially this batch of material that seems more informed by that part of our background, like they seemed like an apt partner for that kind of thing. And they were, in fact, one of the most receptive labels that we reached out to initially. So it really clicked in a way right away. I also like that they're Boston based. So, like I said, we're not used to being in a retrospective mode with Pelican, but the fact that our roots were with Hydra Head, which was a Boston hardcore label, and that Jeff at the label, that was like a big part of his come up, was listening to those bands and being into that scene. It just felt like there was a certain continuity to it.
That's awesome. I also think it's just kinda cool, like, I mean, granted, Run for Cover has just celebrated their 20th anniversary, so they're not exactly new kids on the block either, but I do feel like they reach maybe a younger generation, and I think it's always cool to see, by the time Run for Cover formed, Pelican were an established band, so I feel like it's cool to see these kinda, like, veteran bands maybe link up with like a label that reaches younger audiences, and I always like seeing that kind of like generational continuity happening.
I think I'm just so stoked to operate in music circles where, like, it honestly doesn't matter, like, the age you are or when you first made your mark or whatever, things tend to be cyclical. Uh, and, there are epics to this band already, much like I'm sure they exist for Run for Cover too, a particular set of years that are marking for whatever reason. And us finding each other in this moment is like the overlap that we didn't know we needed, but here it is, and I think it's been a really good story so far. It's great. Yeah.
So the other sort of genre crossing move here is that you have Jeff Rickley from Thursday singing on a vinyl only version of the album's lead single, Cascading Crescent. How did that collaboration come to be?
That was during one of our first calls with the label when we were setting up the album. We had already finished the album and turned it in. There was talk about doing a Cascading Crescent 7 inch. Actually, the original idea was a one-sided flexi, and like kind of get it out there early for fans, just to have a fun collectible item. And then Jeff from Run for Cover suggested, hey, why don't we do the opposite of the old school jukebox single and instead of, the vocal version on the A side and then an instrumental on the B side, why don't we have like the album version on the A side and then do a bespoke vocal version on the B side? And we were like, hey, that sounds fun, but who could we possibly get for that? And we bounced some ideas, and I think at that point we'd already done a couple shows with Thursday. In the middle of recording our album, actually, we did a couple of shows opening for Thursday, and we knew that Jeff really liked the material, and we really like his vocals. So I just called him up and I said, "Hey, would you be into doing this?" And he was, immediately receptive. The timeline was a little bit tricky because I think we had to turn in mastered audio within a week to hit our deadline. But Jeff recorded like 2 days later. With Scott mixed it the next day, and then it was mastered by the end of the week. It was the most ridiculous timeline that somehow came to fruition.
We've had vocalists before. This was, I think this was the one where, due to the material, it's a shorter song. It like has some peaks and valleys. That I was like, man, I don't know how vocals are going to latch onto this. Listening back to it the first time, I remember going to, and Trevor was DJing that night, and I had my AirPods on when I was riding my bike to where he was DJing, and I'm like, I got to pull over because I'm either going to get hit in traffic from like letting go of my handlebars, or something. But it was just like he had really like nailed the emotive content of the song and like the peaks and valleys of it, and he gave it this sort of like, like a hardcore sort of framework that you could ask yourself, like, was the song written before or after? With him in mind, it's really like it's such a harmonious blending that I'd be surprised if 20 years from now I didn't remember what came first, the song or the vocal performance.
I feel bad hyping it so much. I mean, there's only 500 copies
Yeah.
of
Yeah,
it.
I haven't even heard it. I mean, I would love to hear it. But yeah, it's like it sounds so special, and it's gonna go down as one of those like rare gems, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of the idea, the weirdo jukebox single.
So we've been talking about this record really represents a lot of different sides of the band. Especially outside of just metal, especially kind of in with that punk and hardcore kind of stuff. So we're gonna look at some of the albums that influenced it, which are pretty genre diverse. I'm excited for talk about these. There's a lot of albums on here that I love as well. Yeah, the first one is Sunny Day Real Estate's LP2, aka Pink album. Tell me how this album informed the new Pelican album.
Trevor will have plenty to say about this one because I know that he cares for this album as well. I remember, but this was my pick. I remember seeing the art for Diary at the time. I think it might have been an alternative press or something. And just being like, looking at the little cartoony people, I'm sure they have a proper name, but I was like, oh, I don't know if this will, really be my thing or whatever. I didn't pay it too much mind. And then I was shopping at Reckless one day when I had, moved here, and I remember seeing just the Pink tape. And that day I also bought a Ride tape. I remember correctly. Yes. Anyway, I was just like, I went up to the checkout clerk and I was like, hey, I remember the first one. I haven't heard this. And he was immediately like, you got to buy this. Um, I was like, is it kind of like heavy? He's like, it's all the heavy you need or something, And I remember putting it on. Um, and, if you remember record store clerks in the 90s or even to this day, not the most like sociable bunch of people, but I was making friends slowly. Anyway, I bought it and I remember putting it on and just being like, so wowed by Jeremy's voice. Uh, like it just, it immediately like gets into your soul. It's so like just like cathartic. It kind of knocks your breath out when you first hear it. And obviously, it's been an ongoing appreciation affair for their other works, but that one has some real amazing moments, especially on the guitar front too. Like really interesting, you know, chord voicing choices. like Jannah and Eight were two songs that immediately resonated with me. And I play that tape like to this day. I mean, it's just a very impactful album. There are a couple guitar moments on Flickering Resonance where I was hoping not to get too close um, to the influences there, but I think one of the things I really appreciate about playing with Trevor is how, as much as occasionally I want both our guitars to do the same thing, for like a stereo rocking effect. Uh, he's always like, "No, I've got something else in mind," and then it just becomes this like interwoven melodic thing where like it's hard to know which guitar is doing what. And I hear some of that on Sunny Day for sure, whether intentional or not.
I think for us, like we've always said, one of the reasons we don't have vocals is because our songs have so many layers, and all four of us are kind of doing different things at the same time. So there's not really space for vocals. But Sunny Day Real Estate LP2 is the the document that proves that thesis wrong, because the fact that Jeremy can not only find space for vocals in those songs but also deliver on that level is just really, really fucking remarkable. Yeah, that was a record that I bought when it came out. It was hugely inspirational, especially like, I mean, nobody knew, like, people weren't really calling things emo at that point yet, or there was some usage of that, but it wasn't clear how they plugged into the scene or if they were a part of the scene. It was just something, some new expression of the sort of the punk ideology that didn't align with anything else, that was like far more musician focused than just like a sound or a vibe. So, and being able to see that musicianship could be a part of punk music on that level was really inspirational. I mean, that was the record that introduced me to weird time signatures and shit like that. So it was really, really educational and foundational.
So the next one on the list is Corrosion of Conformity's Deliverance.
I'm going to let
That's mine.
Laurent take this one.
That is mine too. I consider this particular era of corrosion conformity, so this is like Blind on, to be very formative in some of my riff choices. Um, Blind, but also at the time, some of the other bands from the New Orleans scene that were, really just blending all sorts of different sounds, like presenting things in this sort of like sludgy stoner way, but clearly with a foot into like the Sabbath side of things too. Like Crowbar and I Hate God were just immediately I was like, this is for me. Uh, they had such like a classicism to it too, like just like a reverence for classic rock and some of the guitar interplay that was happening. There was immediately memorable like hooky things. And Deliverance is just one of those records that I just like, I can't stop listening to it. It especially tonally, I'm just like, that's the tone I want. Every guitarist has like their Hall of Fame, like Holy Grail, like tone records. At least I imagine they do. That's on a handful of ones for me. Um, the clarity, the heaviness, the low end, it's kind of all there, and it's not scooped. It's got a really nice warm mid-range, and I just really like his vocals. The a couple of videos were making the rounds on MTV at the time too, so I just have it's just like a really classic crossover era for me. And I often joke with Trevor and Lair, because I'll some of these songs will resurface on like either playlists that we share with each other, or like occasionally I'll be like, man, this song is still doing it for me. And Trevor will be like, I don't recognize this era of corrosion and conformity. I only recognize the,
I'm
you
I'm
know, the
I'm an
early.
eye for an eye guy. Yeah.
um, so it's fine. Like that's COC. There's an era for everybody. But yeah, this is one of mine for sure. Big fan.
I just I just want to say I'm not against that corrosion record. I'm just not as familiar with it as the early shit.
So next up is Chavez Gone Glimmering.
Yeah, one of mine as well. Just the akin to like what's happening on Sunny Day Real Estate. There's just some. This is just one of those guitar bands where I'm like, especially like say the song "Break Up Your Band," which I think is track 2 on that one. I'm just like, I want that riff. They remind me of Shiner at times and bands like that that I think are, um, for there. It's like a musicians band type of deal where you run into musicians, or you did for a long time, and they were like, "Yeah, I love Chavez, big Chavez fan." There was I think a double CD that Larry got, with Gone Glimmering, and the other one is like a combo pack or something. Um, and like I feel like I run into people who are in bands who are Chavez fans, and then I'm, sort of divorced from seeing this like wider appreciation for them. But the recording alone, like the drums on there, so everything just sounds like it's that wonderful like live in the room sort of sound where it just sounds huge. And in Break Up Your Band, there's like a distorted bass in there that I'm like, it's just fantastic. And just one of those records where they're marrying like heavy guitar stuff with like serious melodic sensibilities, and his voice is able to reach some really nice melodic highs too. It's just like a perfect combination of emo, hardcore, and all those things, but like without being any one of those things. They're just like Chavez.
I think they're really good at one of my favorite things, which is finding a spot for dissonance in the middle of melody. Like if you can come up with a melody line that has like a little bit of dissonant weirdness to it, it will get stuck in your head like nothing, or get stuck in my head like nothing else. But I like that trick. I feel like for a certain person that really clicks the boxes.
I mean, I definitely think that's one of the appeals of Pelican for sure.
Rad.
Um, it's also cool to see that record on the list because, Matt Sweeney is like everywhere now, and I feel like Chavez is almost underrated compared to like everything else he does. And so
Mhm.
I'm always like, hey, like Matt Sweeney's name is popping up all the time, and I'm like, can we please recognize Chavez in the middle of some of the.
Need a Chavez recognition day. We've got national this, national that. Throw that onto the calendar somewhere.
uh, cool. So next up is Seaweed's "Span Away."
Yeah. So I was. I mean, I think anybody who was into or is into any scene really. But okay, so as a '90s like Seattle, like sub pop, grunge sort of, obsessive for a moment there, like you start to want to grab onto like any of the bands that are like around that are doing like a similar thing, or like label affiliated or whatever. Um, I could say the same thing about like I didn't get into, the Melvins from day one. I found out about the Melvins a little bit later, through, kind of like hunting around and looking for things that were connected either through players or through thanks lists. Do you remember reading thanks lists back in the day? Especially in metal records, it was like there would be like 40 of them in there, and you could plot out your year by just looking at like a thank you list. So I can't quite remember how I found out about Seaweed. Um, but for me, finding out that, some drums on there had been done by Matt Cameron from Soundgarden, um, drew me to this particular one. And I like other Seaweed records too, but the song Magic Mountain is my call out track on this one. And it honestly could be a Chavez song. So there's similarities there too, but it's this like, at least as a guitarist, the tone is warm. It's just like this martially sounding, mid-range, hooky. The drums are just like super present, just like one of those classic recordings. And they straddled like so many different worlds. I'm trying to remember if they were playing, if they must have, did they play Warped? They must have. I feel like it's one of those bands that ended up on that tour, maybe did or should have, but they're classic for me. They're like a pair of checkered Vans. Like it's just always fun to put this particular record on. I was just looking at the tape last night because I was trying to remember, what drew me to it. And like you open it and like, they're all sitting there in like jeans and Vans shoes and like flannels. And you're like, that's just like, to me, takes me back to like a classic time when Like punk bands could get kind of heavy. Heavier bands could have punk moments. Like there was just no, just a little bit less self-awareness. And yeah, it's just one of those records that's like really withstood the test of time for me in a lot of different ways. And again, like I think like one of those, musicians bands for a lot of people. Not that we're all like not obsessed with Instagram, but like I'll throw up a story with like a seaweed record on there. Inevitably, someone goes, "Love seaweed, big seaweed fan." There's those other bands who like Polvo and other things like that.
I think Seaweed and Chavez both kind of being these like, a little more niche, maybe like you said, musicians bands. The next one is something that I think transcends that a lot of people appreciate. Quicksand's Slip.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know anybody that doesn't like Quicksand. And if I do know them, I've like buried it in my subconscious that we don't overlap on that particular thing. Uh, it's one of those things. Like I remember seeing the CD. I remember seeing the back cover. The black and white photo. I was like, oh man, New York band. Like this is going to be cool. I was just really getting into New York hardcore, and I was really just scratching the surface with, mostly major kind of label stuff at the time. This would have been prior to getting into Revelation. So I was really like painting the story backwards, and then discovering other things that those guys had done afterwards. But it is like both on a recording but also songwriting element, like just so flawless start to finish. And there's like a percussive element to the riffage that clearly influenced so many other people at the time who paid attention. I remember seeing Scotty and recently play at one of their shows, and I can't remember the song they covered, but I'm like, that makes so much sense that he would be a Quicksand fan, and I'm sure that lots of other people in big bands were paying attention to this, like, groovy, rhythmic, but not like obvious songwriting style um, that maintains, the hardcore roots, but pushes into like really different territory and has just managed to be like timeless. The bass lines are super audible and clear. There's not like a wasted note on that record. And while I've liked and loved some of the follow-up records that they did to varying degrees, I've liked all of them. But Slip is the one that to me is just like it's like an iconic moment in time, and it's a phenomenal record.
I think
And
that
so, I mean, in terms of like,
I was going to say, in terms of influence, like, I think you hear it all over the way Brian and Larry play together. It seems like such a
yeah,
foundational band for, I mean, hardcore writ large, but also like, um, definitely those two, the way that they interact and the way they find like swing and groove to everything we do, even when it's like sort of an oddball time signatures. I think that like I hear the thumbprint of Quicksand all over it. Is there anyone in the history of hardcore that has had a wider reaching influence over such a broad span of sounds as Walter? I mean, between fucking,
There's definitely
it's
not.
insane.
The answer is no.
yeah, it's
I know. I mean, it's a rhetorical question, obviously, but it's like, fucking a, man. That guy, he's brilliant.
It is crazy because, like, I mean, given like I was born in the early 90s, and like given my age, I kind of came to Walter's bands after finding out that they had all influenced all the bands I like.
yeah,
Um and it's just like it was just wild to be like, "Oh, so like these 30 bands I love are obviously rooted in Gorilla Biscuits, and then these 30 are like clearly playing from Quicksand."
Yeah,
And it's just like, "Oh, like you've just invented most of the music I like." And then Rival Schools were like an active band at the time, touring with a lot of
yeah,
those bands,
yeah.
and I'm like, and now you're just still doing it. You're just still out there as like a, but yeah,
And now we're label mates with rival schools, so let's make that connection. Get some shows going.
yeah, we need a Pelican Rival Schools
I
tour
think that'd be
for
sick,
sure.
no doubt.
So next up is another New York band. Texas is the Reason. Do you know who you are? who are also reunited right now, and theoretically you could tour with Texas is the Reason.
Unfortunately, Norm's not a part of the band, which I think is a huge part of what we love about Texas is the Reason. But I mean, make no mistake, like they are part of that same wave of New York hardcore where it's like looking for, I feel like New York hardcore had become so codified into a certain group of aesthetics that, and like things were starting to get violent at the shows, and like people who were actively looking for a way to change the scene started branching out into other avenues, especially the incorporation of melody. And you see that in Quicksand, and you see it all over Texas is the Reason. Um, that is one thing about their influence over our band that always sticks out to me. One anecdote is Colin, the bass player in my band Relayer, once said to me, I always thought that the Pelican template was Jack with one eye down tuned to B. Which once he said it, I was like, oh yeah, I mean, you can hear that in so many of our songs. And yes,
Hmm.
I fully remember when that record came out. Laurent and I were already obsessed with the 7 inch, and I think it was release day. We drove to Dummy Room Records and both bought it. And I threw it on a cassette tape, and like everywhere we drove that summer, we were listening to that album. I mean, it's the interplay of the guitars, the melodies, the catharsis is contained within the songs. It was just like a perfect record.
Yeah, I can't say it better. I throw it on, it puts me in the best mood and immediately like transports me back to like a very impactful time as a young person. Um, but yeah, there are guitar choices made on there that are just very compelling. It's a great record. Wish they'd made more.
Me
Yeah, me
too.
too.
Um, so next up is another emo album. It's Mineral's second and best album, if I may add.
Thank you.
And
Sorry.
yeah, tell us about how End Serenading is the best Mineral album and how it influenced the new Pelican
I
album.
feel like that record never really got its due because they broke up before they were able to tour it. But to me, it's like I love the first one too, but it seems really clear to me that the first one is super Sunny Day Real Estate influenced, and on End Serenading, they kind of reached into their themselves and kind of discovered their own sound, and it's just a fucking fantastic realization of it. The songs, while not traditionally heavy, when they hit the climax moments on that album, there's just so much heaviness and weight to it. But the guitar interplay is really, really, really rich. And I think their use of guitar harmonies in reaching some of those apex moments are super influential on me. I remember going to see them at Fireside with Laurent back in the day, and there's I'm bad with song titles, but the first song in that record uses like a certain type of guitar harmony, with just using the open string over and over again, but changing the position of the string on of the finger on the string above it. And I remember seeing Laurent employ that years later and being like, "That's the mineral trick." So he was studying them as closely as I was that night, I could tell. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I ended up playing the same guitar
that's right. Yeah, you got the
issue.
same hammer.
Yes,
That's right.
yeah, on Australasia, and then I think of it after that I moved on, but the gold top Hamer was the first guitar I used on the self-titled demo and on Australasia, and I don't know that I bought it intentionally for that purpose, but I remember thinking like this is the same guitar that he was playing in Mineral. Um,
I remember when the reissues came out, I thought finally there's going to be a critical reevaluation and people are going to love End Serenading, but then like all the reviews were for the first album, or like the reviews for the first album rated higher or something. I was just like, come on, people, when is End Serenading going to get its due?
It's mind blowing, and I'm so happy to hear basically your review of it because that is like word for word my thoughts. Like it just feels so obvious that the first record, like you said, is so sort of sunny day, and then this one just they're like their own thing, and like it's strange to me that people don't. I mean, when I say something sounds like Mineral, I always mean it sounds like End Serenading, you know, like but.
Yeah, there you go. And Chris really like he discovered his like he starts doing vocal harmony. Like his harmonies on that record are fantastic. He like really discovered himself as a vocalist too. It's like this yeah, everything just coming into focus and in such a beautiful way. It's a shame that they broke up after that. I mean, I like the Gloria records too, but they didn't really hit quite that same pinnacle.
I know, and I'm bummed because they came back, put out 2 more songs in 2019, and now apparently they're playing their farewell show this year, and I'm like, I thought they would, like, pull an American Football, make, like, that long-awaited new record, but not happening, I guess.
Yeah, just not in it for us. Oh well.
So, for something a lot heavier after Mineral is Godflesh's Selfless.
Talk about a transition.
But hey, it's got one of the same things that we've been talking about. The through line with that record and all these other records that we're talking about is the incorporation of melody in a heavy context. I mean, like, I think Selfless is the record, and again, it's a record that doesn't get that much play because people are more fixated on the first couple of records or what came after it. But Selfless is a record where um, like the recording is pristine and Justin had figured out how to incorporate melody in a way that didn't detract from the heaviness. It just sort of like gave more of a melodic hook to everything that was going on. I think the riffs on that record are just meticulously constructed. There's just like a level of precision to the execution that's, yeah, I don't know. It's just a really great one. It's a really affecting album. Go Spread Your Wings too is as the bonus track is like
Mhm.
just the most expansive, crazy. Like I don't even know how he can have that many ideas floating around in his head and turn it into like a 25 minute masterpiece like that. It's just like so it's awe-inspiring.
Yeah, an interesting example of a band that like is it's such a wide like just genre spanning discography that starts with something so heavy and so percussive and just so industrial sounding, like it's really almost like claustrophobic in its heaviness. And then like little windows of melody get added the further into the career they go, you know, leading up to like the Yezu moment where it's like, I'm actually gonna clean thing and straight up do like saccharine type of positivity. And that was impactful for sure. And sort of realizing there are other bands who see the heaviness of melody and like presenting like, you know, joyful compositions, or that like something that may sound joyful on the surface is actually dripping with heaviness. And sadness, perhaps. Not sure, but yeah, it is it's such a kaleidoscope of sounds, yet always sounds like you can't put any of his records on and not immediately go, oh, that's Godflesh or Yezu. Like it's not, it's immediately him.
So every record we've talked about so far has been from the 90s, something that you were probably listening to in Pelican's early days, but this next one is a lot newer. It's Drug Church's Cheer.
Yeah, that's a record that came on at the bar when Laurent and I were hanging out one night. I was already a big fan, but I could see it on his face that it was connecting right away. And I know he's gotten really invested in their output since then as well. Yeah, it's just like I think that there's so much going on in hardcore right now that's really inspirational. A real embrace of melody and after a decade of what felt like hardcore getting a little bit f- entrenched once again and just being heavy and nihilistic, that they are doing something that's really creative and open and interesting and melodic. And I love that his songs are these like sort of brilliant vignettes about broken characters. It just feels like every one of their songs is a really rich text, from the music to the lyrics to the vocals, and yeah, it's something that I've been listening to a lot the last couple of years, both that one and the most recent one. Yeah, I just I'm excited that there's this new wave of hardcore that has embraced melody on that level.
For me, and Trevor's right, like there, I would describe it as this. There are moments when you're like, you've got the cabal of bands that you're into, and that's like the suit you wear. I'm into these bands and these bands. And every once in a while you hear something and you're almost like embarrassed that you don't know about it because it comes on and you're like, okay, I really need to be into this. Like, how do I work my way back and immediately correct this error? That was one of those records I was like, I don't know this band. I don't know this record. Like, but that needs to be changed immediately. So just like, it's like visceral in that way. It's still, and it's cool to like be older or whatever and still be feeling that way about music and be, laser focused on just like, hey, I want to know new things, like new things that people are doing, new articulations, new forms of expression, rather than going like all the cool stuff's been done and, you know, everything that mattered happened 20 years ago or whatever. I think you could say that some records are formative for sure. You could see like the stuff I picked was, like you said, mostly old. I mean, we could do this episode again another time and pick 5 records from another decade and have just as, I think, a strong and passionate of a conversation about that. But I'm glad that when I saw the list, I was really glad that Trevor included it um, on there. And we didn't discuss our choices, we just kind of went for it.
Awesome. Well, that's interesting to hear because what I saw on the list was that the first 9 were the same and that you each had a different 10. Um, so the next 2 albums, so Trevor, just you had Fugazi's Red Medicine.
Yeah, and I think I think all four of us could have picked that one. Fugazi is a
Yeah.
band that we went to see a lot during our come up. Um, I first saw them on the Killtaker tour. I didn't see them on the Red Medicine tour. I met my wife at the End Hits tour. I mean, that's just a band that, again, I mean, I feel like I'm going to be retreading things I already said about other bands, but they are a band that kind of demonstrated that you can pursue punk as an ideology or as an artistic expression, but also lean fully into the musicianship and the craftsmanship behind it. Every single Fugazi show was a different experience. You could see them working it out on stage and like connecting and investigating the songs in a different way every time. But it was also just a pure expression of emotionality and just fully giving themselves over to this music and to these songs. Red Medicine, I feel like, is an apex of sorts for them. I feel like the recording in particular, but also the songcraft on that record are just unparalleled. There's just so much richness to the sounds and the songs on that record for me.
And then Laurent, your pick that just you had was Ned's Atomic Dustbin, Are You Normal?
That is actually Trevor's pick. So Trevor gets 2 picks,
I feel
although we both.
I think I removed it to put Fugazi. But, I mean, I'll ride for Are You Normal if we've got time.
Yeah, unless there was maybe like I don't know if there was any typo or miscommunication with, but whoever, if you guys want to talk about it, go ahead.
I mean, much like Mineral, Are You Normal is the follow-up album that does not get its due. I think everybody who thinks or talks about Ned's Atomic Dustbin thinks or talks about Godfather, which was, yeah, I mean, it's a great record. It's got some hits, Kill Your Television, Gray Cell Green, Happy, but I feel like they reached a new apex on Are You Normal? And it's such a totally original sound too. I mean, like there's some roots in the Manchester scene, but they're reaching into something that's so totally different than their peers and what was going on at the time. I mean, it sounds very much of its era in a way, like it couldn't exist in a different context than the early 90s alternative scene, but they're also just doing something that felt wholly in their own lane. The last like 4 songs on that record are just really, really cool, really emotional pieces of music. And I'm a huge fan. And I never hear anybody talk about that record. And at one point, Laurent brought it up during the writing of Flickering Resonance as like, wait, not A, you're into Ned's Atomic Dustbin, and we've been friends for 25 years, and this has never come up. But it's not just that, but it's the actual second album. It was a mind blowing moment during the writing.
I remember seeing videos that were part of the first one and they sounded great. And so when the second one came out, I was like, I got to get into this. I mean, we were just went to a show the other day and I even talked about like how there's some stuff people got to revisit, like the second EMF record.
Mm.
There was some interesting things happening in England where, like more like dancier modes of music percussively were mixing with alternative stuff. And I mean, in the context of like Ned's Atomic Dustbin, the bass sound alone is enough to be discussing them. Um, it's just like so unique sounding. And in terms of the current absorption of like all things shoegaze, even though they're not, a shoegaze band, I think they are adjacent to the um, like creativity around that scene where people were really pushing instrumentation and different sounds and new ways to do the rock thing.
Certainly, I hear them as a post shoegaze band in of that first wave. Like, I don't see, Ned's Atomic Dustbin happening without like uh My Bloody Valentine coming first. There's something about the way the melodies are constructed, especially on, they have two bass players, so there's like the rhythm bass and the lead bass. The lead bass taking more of like a Peter Hook role or something.
Yeah.
And I think that like a lot of the melodies that are coming from that melodic bass feel indebted to Peter Hook, but also like some of the shoegaze bands that preceded them.
Hey, I mean, I never would have thought that we'd be in 2025 with people regularly referring to the Deftones as a shoegaze band. So maybe all it's gonna take is like that one Ned's Atomic Dustbin song going viral on shoegaze TikTok.
And we'll all remember this as the moment that made that happen.
Yeah, absolutely, no question. And I just want to say the only reason I removed them from the list and replaced them with Fugazi was because I realized that we were supposed to be talking about albums that influenced our album, and I don't think that Ned's Atomic Dustbin has much of a thumbprint on our record. I think it was just something that came up while we were making the songs that I thought was interesting. And that's why I replaced them with Fugazi, which is more of a foundational band for us. But hey, man, I will rap about Ned's Atomic Dustbin all day.
One thing that stood out to me about this list is that, and not that I'm necessarily expected that it, but it does stand out that none of the albums are instrumental.
Ooh, I hadn't even
Right,
thought
because
of
I don't
that.
think we're really, yeah, we're sort of like a happens to be instrumental band in our opinion, or mine at least. It wasn't like intentional, but vocals weren't an element in some of the music that we listened to where it was like, oh, and we sort of thought we need a vocalist at some point, and then we just got further and further from that possibility, and then the music sounded like a thing, and then a few shows happened, and then it was like we should just ride for this.
Yeah,
And it
I feel like by the time we started playing shows and we didn't have a singer yet, and it was working, like people seemed to enjoy our band more so than the bands that we were doing that had a singer. But also the way we were writing music, like Laurent and I were kind of taking up the space that might have been occupied by a vocalist. So at a certain point, it didn't feel like there was space for vocals. But I think like when we're writing, we're probably pulling from influences that do have vocals, and we're just sort of emulating those through the way that we write on guitar.
Awesome. Well, this has been a blast. Anything else you want to add about the album or anything else on your mind before we go?
Now just stoked to that we got to do this. It's great to be able to talk about records that not only influence this in our process, but are just great records in general that are due to be discussed more often for some of them.
I just want to add, if our list of influences didn't already date us as being old, I just wanted to also add an editorial that I wish that Brooklyn Vegan would go back to doing vegan food reviews as well.
I will pass that along.
All
All right. I'll let you both go. Thanks so much. Have a great one.
right, thanks, Andrew.
Appreciate it, Andrew. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for listening. Thanks again to Pelican for coming on the show. Their new record, Flickering Resonance, is out May 16th on Run for Cover, and you can catch Pelican on tour starting July 17th. And if you like what you heard, give us a like, a good rating, tell your friends about us, subscribe. All that little stuff goes a really long way, and we really, really appreciate it. Thanks so much, and see you next time.